Welcome to tonight's virtual meeting of the Port Phillip City Council, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit Willem clan of the Bunurong and traditional owners of the other lands from which we meet on today. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. So obviously, due to the COVID-19 restrictions, tonight's meeting's being held via our Webex platform and streamed via Council's webcast page and Facebook Live. Of course, although we've planned for any things to go wrong with our online meeting, there's always the risk of them being beyond our control. And if these technical difficulties prove too much, we'll take a little adjournment and come back. If the issue cannot be resolved, however, and the meeting cannot continue, we will adjourn to a later day and details will be circulated as soon as possible. So all the submissions from the members of the public will be heard at the start of the meeting, and then additionally, voting on all the motions will be under division, where the chair will call upon councillors individually in rotating alphabetical order to state their vote. I will remind attendees that any member of the public addressing council must extend due courtesy and respect to council and the processes under which it operates, and must take direction from the chair whenever called on to do so. Speakers must remain respectful and statements or questions must not be defamatory, offensive or objectionable, aimed at embarrassing a councillor or a member of council staff. Just relate all your questions and queries to council as an organisation or body, and they must not relate to a matter outside the powers of council. So let's get started, everyone. We're going to agenda item number 1, which is apologies. Councillors, do we have any apologies? There being none, let's move on to 2, the minutes of the previous meetings. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 19th of May 2021 have been circulated. Are there any questions? If not, can I have a motion to confirm these minutes? I've got Councillor Copsey to move and Councillor Martin to second. So let's put that to the vote, and I'll call on each councillor under division. So Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor, you're a bit hard to hear there, Councillor Clark. Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford, for. Councillor Consolo.
For.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
And Councillor Sirakoff.
In favour.
Great, that motion is carried. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? No? Great, we'll move on to public question time and submissions. So as I said before, we'll now hear all public questions and comments on report items from members of the public. All the requests were required to be submitted by 4 p.m. this afternoon. So let me get my list on that one. So obviously we're all virtual tonight. So the first person I call upon is Bernadette Hickey, who is submitting a public question to council. Bernadette, if you could state your name and suburb, and then you please speak or ask your question.
Okay. So my name is Bernadette Hickey. I live in Middle Park, and my question is in relation to the setting of the rate for the 2021-22 budget. I'm under the impression that the 2% rate increase which Port Phillip has elected to use for the budget is actually the highest in Victoria. Most city councils have chosen the 1.5%, which was the recommendation by the Commissioner. And in fact, some councils have actually increased their rate by a percentage less than that. So my question relates to why Port Phillip thinks it's necessary to increase the rate to that level, especially in the current economic climate. I understand that there have been some cost savings made, not so much savings as just alterations in projected spending. And so the first section of my question, and then my second relates to why it's thought to be necessary to disproportionately allocate that rate increase to residential property owners as opposed to businesses in the city of Port Phillip, when you take into account the projected economic activity that was included in the Treasurer's speech and papers presented with the Victorian state budget, which suggested that there was quite a significant economic recovery occurring in Victoria and projected that recovery to go through the forward financial year.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Dennis O'Keefe to respond to your questions.
Through you, Mayor, and thank you, Bernadette, for your question. The draft budget for 2021-22 proposes an increase in Council's revenue from rates of 1.5%, as per the prescribed maximum rate cap set by the Victorian State Government. The actual increase for individual ratepayers will depend on the relative value of their property, as set by the Victorian Valuer General effective the 1st of January 2021, as a percentage of the total valuation of all properties in the municipality. Council is proposing delivering efficiency savings of $2.3 million in the draft budget, on top of the $12.6 million achieved in the 4 years prior, helping to keep rates within the rate cap, which expenses such as waste and construction costs have significantly exceeded. In order to fiscally position Council to deliver to the community the proposed services that are detailed in the proposed Council plan and budget, a number of saving initiatives have been included in the draft budget, which has recently been with the community for consultation. The community feedback will be tabled at the special meeting of Council on June the 8th, 2021.
Thank you, Dennis. I now call on Helen Hickey, submitting a public question to the Council. So Helen, if you could state your name and suburb and then ask your questions.
Helen Hickey, Middle Park.
Please ask your questions, Helen.
Now, I'm 92 and I'm being impoverished by your rates, and I'm having to decide which bills to defer and meals to skip to find the money to pay the rates on my home. I'm told you want to increase my rates by another 4.5% in 2021. You've doubled my rates in the just 8 years. I know many Port Phillip elderly residents who can no longer afford this. Your reverse mortgage option isn't the solution. It's just accommodating Council's greed. Middle Park and Albert Park homeowners are being hit with rates upon rates because we own our own homes, because we've been careful during our working life, saved and paid off our homes, and now we're a rates target. You reported during COVID that you had made $12 million in saving cuts. Where's that money? Because just to waiver my and every other pensioner's rates, I'll use it. Last week, you finally admitted that you'd given Live Nation a $1 billion lease waiver. Well, I want a waiver too. Local elderly residents are more deserving than a US-based corporation. We want our rates waived for 2020 and 2021, and do it tonight. Thank you.
I believe Dennis O'Keefe will respond to this one as well.
Through you, Mayor, and thank you, Helen, for your question. My prepared response is pretty similar to the response I have just given to Bernadette, so I won't go through that again and waste councillors and indeed the community's time. What I will say, Helen, is that Council has a financial hardship policy to provide assistance to those ratepayers experiencing financial hardship, with indeed additional support for pensioners like yourself. The policy and details are on, and how to apply for assistance are on the Council's website. And if I can speak to recent experience myself in dealing with the community's requests for waivers under that policy, I do understand the significant financial stress many in our community are feeling and dealing with, and Council within its remit and within its capability is trying to address as best as possible those in extreme financial hardship. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I call upon Paul Hickey, also asking some public questions. If you could state your name and suburb, please. Paul, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Mayor. Sorry. Good evening, Mayor, and good evening, councillors. Again, Middle Park. Just with regards to Dennis's comments, there is no effective rate program in place. People still have to pay their rates. All you've offered them is deferral till the 30th of June, after which they then are charged an interest on outstanding bills. Unlike Live Nation, we're not being given a waiver, and I think the elderly ratepayers of this municipality deserve the similar treatment you've given to the US multinational. But let me move on to my question. 2017, I stood in front of council, and Madam Mayor, it was when you had been first elected. I think it was one of your first meetings. And I gave a detailed description of the 2-year battle we had just getting a basic fence fixed for my elderly mother, which took us 2 years. We started it in 2015. We had to battle council till 2017 through 4 different council departments. We had to buy 7 different council permits. They lost our plans 4 times, and it was just a litany of mistake, muddle and mess. I did also speak to the Chief Executive when he first came to Port Phillip. He was also shocked at what we experienced, and he gave me a commitment that he would use our experience, our case, to reform and improve council processes, council staff responsiveness, and overall administrative competency. So my big question tonight, Madam Mayor, through yourself, because you were there when I asked this, when I gave this statement, what's been done? What has been achieved in 4 years? Because I'm hearing similar experiences from other Port Phillip residents that they have to battle the bureaucracy, the staff are disinterested in their problems, and it's just costing them big money.
Okay, thank you. Lily Rosick will respond to your question.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I'm pleased to advise that we're, since that time, since 2017, we have worked hard to improve our services, in particular to ensure consistency, responsiveness and timely resolution of customer requests. We undertook a customer journey mapping exercise with customers and council officers to identify opportunities to streamline and simplify our processes, particularly in relation to high volume transactions such as planning and building. We've improved online services that's resulted in reduced handling times and faster issuing of permits. We've provided staff training, and we've improved our communications across the organisation. Over the coming months, we'll be implementing new customer-facing and back-office processes and technology as part of our customer experience program, which will further enhance our services for our community. And I'm happy to advise that we've also implemented a new customer service charter.
Thank you, Lily. I call on Christina Kinst, also submitting a public question to Council. Christina, if you could state your name and suburb, and then you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mayor and Councillors, good evening. My name is Christina Kinst and I live in St Kilda. I have some questions arising from the last council meeting. At the last council meeting on the 19th of May, Council said it had received inquiries about the local festival fund, leading officers to review the grant process, including eligibility criteria for applicants. I note councillors discussed the revised criteria and guidelines for the local festival fund at an informal meeting held at 7 p.m. on the 12th of May. My questions to you are, will the revised criteria and guidelines be released for public comment? If yes, when? And if not, why not? What principles is Council relying on to define the political nature of the community group's activities? And will the revised criteria and guidelines extend to the political nature of the content of proposed local festival fund events? Also at the last meeting, Council prevented a resident from reading out a councillor quote from the online weekly publication Twist of the 17th of May. Respecting that directive, I have provided councillors with a screenshot of the quote and a link to the full story. My questions in relation to this quote are: what is the council's position on councillors expressing personal opinions under their councillor title about community groups they dislike or disagree with? And is the councillor's comment in this quote reflective of council's 12th of May discussion about the revised local festival fund criteria? Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Kylie Bennett to respond.
Through you, Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to thank Christina for her questions. At this stage, it's currently planned to bring the revised criteria and guidelines to an upcoming council meeting where members of the public will be able to comment through the public speaking process. With respect to what those criteria and guidelines will contain, officers are still working through those at the moment, and we'll certainly be able to provide some further information on the content of those in due course. With respect to the second part of Christina's question, under Council's media protocol, councillors are free to express their personal opinions to the media, providing that they don't purport to be speaking on behalf of the wider council. With respect to the discussion at the briefing on the 12th of May, officers sought feedback on several matters, including criteria, the definition of the term festival, as well as selection panel and approval processes.
Thank you. I call upon Justin Halliday, also submitting a public question. Justin, if you could state your name and suburb and then speak.
Justin Halliday,
please.
St Kilda East. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. Hello again. 2 weeks later. I have a question for council about the draft budget for the next 4 years, which entrenches compounding inequity of capital investment in specific areas of the city of Port Phillip. Specifically, when we look at areas like Ripon Lee, which have investment of only $29 per resident, Balaclava and St Kilda Reach, which have $180 per resident, compared to Port Melbourne with investment of over $1,200 per resident in the upcoming 4 years. Of council's capital expenditure of $68 million, only $3 million will be spent in the areas east of Brighton Road. And this area represents almost 25% of the total population of Port Phillip, but receives less than 5% of the capital investment in the upcoming budget. If capital expenditure was equitably distributed, this area would have investment of $16 million instead of $3 million. And the residents who live east of Brighton Road are being shortchanged $14 million, which is subsidising new and improved facilities in every other area of the city of Port Phillip except where they live. And when will council invest in improved community facilities and purchase property for new open space to address the inequities faced by almost 25% of residents who live east of Brighton Road? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Justin. Dennis O'Keefe will respond to this question as well.
Through you, Mayor, and again, thank you, Justin, for your question. Council develops the annual capital program through prioritising our investment based on asset condition data, as well as allocating funding to respond to growth. From year to year, the investment in any particular neighbourhood will fluctuate depending on the condition of the assets in the area, as well as the ongoing service needs. Capital expenditure per capita should not be looked at in isolation, as the level of council-owned and managed assets in a neighbourhood will directly impact the level of investment that is required. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I believe Beverly Grant, who's the next person, is not here, but our Kirsty Pearce will read the question.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. The public question from Beverly Grant reads, why is it proposed to increase the rate revenue next financial year at a time when so many people are experiencing financial hardship due to the effects of the pandemic? Should not council salaries be frozen, staffing numbers be held constant or reduced, and fringe projects be scrapped or postponed?
Dennis, you are the man in the hot seat tonight. Could you respond to those questions, please?
Thank you, Mayor. I do seem to be popular tonight. And Beverly, thank you for your question. My prepared response is pretty similar to the questions that Bernadette and Helen provided us with. I guess to paraphrase my response, the Council is in the draft budget, it's proposing to increase the rates revenue in line with the legislated or prescribed 1.5% increase that the state government has made available to councils. And that's basically in the draft budget to obviously support the growth and delivery of the services, growth of the city and the delivery of the services in the proposed plan. We obviously do have, as I mentioned earlier, financial hardship provisions to support the community and members of the community who are in a position where their rates obligations are imposing significant financial stress on them. And we are extra vigilant and reviewing that in the context of the recent Ombudsman's report on financial hardship and rates as well. With respect to the statement that Beverly made regarding freezing staff numbers, cutting expenses, etc., I alluded earlier in my response to the 2.3 million in efficiency savings that are in the proposed budget for next year, but also recognising the significant savings over the last 4 years of the previous council of over $12 million. So from that perspective, as officers and particularly executive and senior officers, we have a keen focus in ensuring that we manage the resources of the city in a fiscally responsible manner, that we look to the future and the long-term growth and sustainability of the city financially, but also that we don't forget those people who, because of economic circumstances, are doing it tough, and where we can, within the remit of council, provide the support that is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I now call upon Julie Pugh, who is speaking to item 7.1, petitions and joint letters. Julie, if you could state your name and suburb, and then please speak to the item.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. It's Julie Pugh. I live in South Melbourne. We have a petition from a group of local residents to construct a community garden on a little piece of disused laneway at the rear of our properties. During the last 12 months, gardening's been something that's, really brought our community together, and we feel like this little bit of land behind our houses would be a lovely place to establish something that we could all share in and be part of. I note that the officers' recommendations say that that they are not in favour of it, and that it's because this piece of land is a road, and I suppose we're sort of asking. It's not a road that has car access to any of the properties that back onto it. It's a little bluestone laneway that you can't really drive down. I suppose we're wondering if it can be reconsidered, or otherwise, what would be the process for us to have the laneway, have the road discontinued, and would it be favourable for us to construct the garden there if that was the case? The officers suggested that we could, as an alternative, have some garden boxes out the front of our properties. It's not really a suitable place for garden beds out the front. We've got, we live on Park Street. It's a busy street with lots of traffic and a tram stop right out the front, and trees that drop lots of prickles all over the front of our houses. So that's not really an option, even though the photos that the officers taken sort of make it look like it could be. It's not really. So yeah, I think that's all that I have to say. So thank you for your time.
Madam Mayor, you're on mute.
Did I just say that all on mute? Oh, darn it. I was about to do it. So I'm sorry, Julie, one of the councillors may take up your questions when we reach that item. I call upon Alison Prasser, who is speaking to item 14.2, which is the proposed tenancy agreement with Lady Forster Kindergarten Incorporated. Alison, if you could state your name and suburb and then please speak to the item.
Alison Prasser, Director, Lady Forster Kindergarten, Elwood. It's a privilege to be here with you virtually on Boomerang Country tonight to be part of the process to establish a long-term lease for the kindergarten's ongoing occupation at its site on Elwood Foreshore. I speak on behalf of the Lady Forster Committee of Management and the community when I express my gratitude for allowing LFK to continue for a second lease on our beautiful site. This will allow us to continue our important coastal curriculum program, which not only allows children to connect with their natural surroundings, it teaches them to care for and respect the environment for future generations. Over the last couple of years, we have undertaken many projects along the foreshore to encourage children to become proactive community citizens. The children do weekly beach cleanups in association with Beach Patrol 3184. The children have constructed habitat boxes in conjunction with the Eco Centre to encourage native species back to the area, and they now take pride of place in our foreshore near LFK. We have developed a community garden and community composting program, and the children sold some of the vegetables harvested from this garden to their families, and we donated the proceeds to a local charity providing meals to the vulnerable. Our community engagement, along with our high quality programs and responsiveness to community needs, has recently allowed us to be rated as exceeding the national average in all 7 quality areas assessed by the Australian Children's Education and Care Quality Authority. And we have in fact been invited to apply for an excellent rating, which is held by only a handful of services across Australia. We look forward to working with the City of Port Phillip over the coming years to continue to build on these foundations. We have strong waiting list numbers up until the end of 2023, and we could essentially fill our sessional programs several times over. A new lease allows us the certainty to plan ahead and to grow our kindergarten. I would like to personally thank Mayor Crawford for her support of the kindergarten over the last few years, and we warmly invite our other councillors to drop by the kindergarten and see our programs in action once lockdown is over. We acknowledge and thank Council for the significant contribution made in supporting early years education. Through this support in the form of discounted rent, amongst so many other supports, we are able to provide possibly the lowest fees for kindergarten in the municipality. This is vital in removing financial barriers to quality early education for many vulnerable families. Although we have been on the foreshore only since 2012, the kindergarten has actually been in existence for almost 100 years, spending our first 88 years in Port Melbourne. During this time, our mission has remained relatively unchanged to provide high-quality early childhood programs with an emphasis on adult play and inclusion. We hope to continue this proud history on the foreshore for the next 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. Well, obviously there was no questions, but thank you for coming to speak to us about that proposed tenancy. All right, councillors, that's the last of the speakers, so we shall move on to councillor question time, which is item 5. Councillors, do we have any questions for the officers? I believe that is Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. 3 quick ones, if I may. The officers provide an update on the installation of lighting in Tarver Street, Port Melbourne.
Who am I going to for that one? Which officer will respond?
Through you, Mayor, it's Chris Carroll here. I'll
Thanks, Chris.
have to take that one on notice tonight, but I'll get back to Councillor Pearl as quickly as I can.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Cool.
Councillor
The
Pearl?
second one is just in relation, this is probably the CEO, in relation to school crossings from Fisherman's Bend to Port Melbourne Primary School. Understand there's currently a investigation that council's leading in terms of school crossings and pathways to the secondary school, but having met residents in Fisherman's Bend this week, there's concern about particularly intersections around Williamstown Road, about safe passage from that side of Williamstown Road to Port Melbourne Primary School. Just wondering if the CEO could make comment on that and see if there's any plans for the City of Port Phillip to work with the state government to ensure that those pathways are safe.
Peter Smith?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we're meeting with Vic Roads around the pedestrian safety for the secondary school. In terms of the primary school, we can take that issue up at the same meeting. I'll just need to get some more advice from you, Councillor Pearl, on the issues, but we'll be able to raise both at the same meeting, I'm sure.
Great. And finally, disappointing if the CEO can provide an update on the timing of the Fisherman's Bend precinct, Montague precinct plan from the state government, and any update that you may have in terms of when the report's going to be produced.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. We've been advised that we're still waiting for the Minister to sign off on the draft precinct plan ahead of consultation. It has been delayed a number of times now, and we are undertaking strong advocacy to bring that first to Council and then release it for community engagement. I am not sure when it will be released, given the previous delays, but the last I heard was in about 6 weeks' time in terms of the most recent schedule. So we are pushing hard for that to be released so the community can have their say.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Martin.
Madam Mayor, my question is probably for Mr O'Keefe, but you may be able to direct it to a better person. At our most recent council meeting, I asked a question about council staffing, and Mr O'Keefe shared that our staffing had gone up by 1% over the last 5 years at EFT equivalent full time. I note that over the last 5 years, the population of Port Phillip's gone up by 11%. So by my calculations, does that indicate that our staffing per head of population has actually dropped by 10%? And if that's the case, has this resulted in a reduction in council services of 10%, or is it more an increase in productivity? And if that's the case, how has this been achieved?
Is that you, Dennis, or Chris Carroll?
Through you, Mayor. I haven't got a scripted response for Councillor Martin, but I'm happy to provide some response to his question. Yes, Councillor Martin, your numbers gel with me with respect to the net increase in FTE and then also, obviously, the growth in the city. Just to confirm that in my 4 years, at least on council, I'm not aware of any significant adjustment to core services delivered to the community. Indeed, other than some additional services, I know we have the new child care service in Farrow Street in South Melbourne, which has added another service and a few extra FTE. But our core services that have been in place for the last 4 years, to my knowledge, have not seen a significant diminution, other than, as you've suggested, some of the efficiency saving activities that probably are reflected in that $12.6 million number I alluded to earlier, relating to the savings over the last 4 budgets. I'm happy to take the question on notice, Councillor, and provide you a more fulsome response in due course.
Thank you, Mr O'Keefe. And Madam Mayor, may I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
There was a very, very good publication produced by the Essential Services Commission that's entitled Local Council Operations Report, so Local Council Outcomes Report, that gives a really good breakdown of all the various figures relating to productivity and finances for all councils in Victoria, and there's a separate section that relates just to the City of Port Phillip. Given the number of questions that we get in public question time about these matters, is it possible for this information to be put on the council website? It may reduce the number of questions that the public ask us because the information will be there. And I note that one of the figures on this site talks about the rate value for this in the City of Port Phillip and the sort of information that it achieves. It looks using 2019-20 dollars as the standard. The information, according to this Essential Services Commission report, suggests that the per capita rate value in Port Phillip fell, in fact, in not 2019-20 dollars from $1,141 per capita in 2016-17 to $1,116 in 2019-2020.
So, Councillor Martin, what was your question? Just if we could pop that on there.
The question is, can Mr O'Keefe confirm that this document will be made available through the council website, which may reduce the number of questions that we get from the public? And secondly, can he take on notice the question that I've asked about the per capita rate charge in the City of Port Phillip over the past 5 years?
Through you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for your question. The first part of your question, yes, it is an excellent document. It's one of the better documents to explain the workings, finances of local government sector in Victoria. It's produced every 2 years under the auspices of the rate capping framework that the state government have set up. With regard to the use of that information, it is a public document. It's available on the ESC's website, along with similar information for every other of the 79 councils, as the information you alluded to for Port Phillip. Currently, senior officers are reviewing the option of providing that in some fashion or other on the website, and we hope to take a proposal to the executive in the coming weeks to get some support for potentially putting that information as a link at least on our webpage. And the second part of the question, as you suggested, I will take on notice. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Consolo.
Thank you. I saw a scary video on a local social media page this week of a near miss with cyclists, and have been told of a death in the same area last year in the St Kilda Junction. So I'd like to ask, has Council developed and actioned an advocacy plan to the state government for bike path protection across St Kilda Junction, where you're heading north with the Fitzroy Street and then the Queens Road turnoff? And if so, what is included in it, please?
Lily Rosick will answer that question.
Through you, Mayor, Council has written on numerous occasions to the Minister and also more recently to the Secretary Paul Eunice of the Department of Transport, advocating for a safe bicycle corridor to be delivered on St Kilda Road. We most recently wrote to the Department of Transport in December and are waiting for a response. Officers are also discussing the St Kilda Road corridor with the Department of Transport at our regular meetings. We recognise the safety concerns. With the release of the new state government's budget, it provides another opportunity for Council to advocate for additional investment to ensure that the safety of cyclists heading in that particular area north towards the CBD and turning off to Fitzroy and Queen Street is addressed, and we have a bicycle corridor delivered.
Thank you.
Question from Councillor Baxter.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. My question it's more of a clarifying question for Dennis O'Keefe. We had a couple of members of the community come here to ask questions, and they were concerned about their rates, and some of the figures that they stated about rate increases included things like 2% and 4.5%. Can I just clarify what the actual overall rates take increase from council is, and how that can affect and not affect people's individual rates payments?
Dennis.
Through you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Baxter, for your question. Look, this is a question and an issue, Councillor, that creates some confusion in the community. The state government, under the rate capping framework, which is now going into its 5th year, I believe, basically put a limit on councils unless they make an application through a different process through the ESC, which we just talked about a second ago, to an increase on their total revenue from rates, limited to whatever is prescribed by the Minister for Local Government in December each year. For the 21-22 budget year, the Minister has prescribed that councils can only lift their rate cap or the rates revenue by 1.5% based on the rate from the previous year, the rates revenue for the previous year. So if I use, for example, and I don't have the exact figure, forgive me, but if our rates revenue is $130 million last year, we have the scope to increase that $130 million based on last year's rateable properties by 1.5%. So the 130 million goes to 133 or whatever the number is, 132.5. So that 1.5% is the headline rate increase that a council can raise its total rate revenue from the city by. when it comes to individual rate payers and property owners, their share of that the share they contribute of that $133 million is basically linked totally to the value of their property as valued independently by the Valuer General of Victoria on the 1st of January each year. The value of their property as a percentage of the total value of all rateable properties in the city. So notwithstanding that the City of Port Phillip can only increase its total rate revenue by 1.5% next year, it's possible, and we haven't taken councillors through the briefing yet for the results of the 21 valuation, but it's possible that some ratepayers may have a rate decrease. Some may have a rate increase that is at the 1.5%, and others may have a rate increase that's above the 1.5%. And some that may be even significantly above the 1.5%. And that is totally linked to their property value. That's how the rating, the NAV rating methodology that the Council of Port Phillip uses is implemented in practice. And this information is always shared, obviously, in rates notices and in the rate brochures, etc. But I will state, Councillor, all councillors and indeed the community, it is a very difficult thing to explain, and it can be a difficult concept for people to fully understand. Thank you.
And just to follow up with my clarification, so the statement made that council is raising residential rates by 4.5% is incorrect.
It is incorrect, and the 2% referred to as the state cap increase by the Victorian government. That's why in my responses to those questions, I was clear in pointing out the rate cap increase in the draft budget is the 1.5%. And to be frank, the rest of the individual rate rises for individuals, as I say, will be totally linked to the value of their property.
Thanks, Dennis O'Keefe. I do have another question, Madam Mayor. This one's for the CEO. So I know that Councillor Martin has asked a couple of questions in previous council meetings about misinformation, particularly around rates that have been circulated in various quarters, particularly online. And I'll note that about 5 hours ago, a post was made by the ratepayers of Port Phillip alleging that council was raising residential rates by 4.5%. As has been stated, this is incorrect. Councillors have access to this information, and so should this group through the councillors they've elected. So what is it that we can do as a council to combat misinformation, deliberate misinformation, I believe, in the community around rates? Because we've got people coming here and asking questions who are desperate, who think that we're doing things that we're not actually doing.
Peter Smith.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Baxter, for the question. Our job as local government is to educate the community, to communicate clearly, as Dennis O'Keefe has said. These are difficult concepts to understand, and we try our best, which is why we have public question time, so we can answer these things. In terms of being able to correct misinformation on social media pages, that's up to the owner of those pages, whether they'd allow us to post a response on those. But generally, we would use our own social media website to try and educate people so they understand facts. But people choose their own information sources. We understand that. Our job is to make sure the information we have on our website through our social media is accurate. And we're always happy to answer any questions in terms of educating our community around our budget and the rates process.
Thank you.
Question from Councillor Sirakoff. Councillor Sirakoff, we can't hear you. Oh, there you are. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just unmuting. Thank you. I'd just like to ask a question referring to the draft budget. Is it true that the rate in the dollar will be increased by 2.4%, and that if you own a residential property, that if your property doesn't increase in value or decrease in value, that your rates will go up by 2.4%, And if your property does go up by, say, around 2%, then your rates are likely to go up by 4%. If your property value goes up by 2%, then your rates are likely to go up by 4.5%.
Is that Dennis or Chris?
Through you, Mayor. I can take that question on notice. The specifics of those numbers, I don't have information in front of me that I could give an answer that's justifiably to respond to the councillor's question. But we will, as I mentioned earlier, the results, the Valuer General has just recently certified the valuation for the City of Port Phillip, and it is officers will be taking councillors through that briefing next week.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, I think it was available to the whole community through the draft budget volume 2 from pages 110 to pages 113. So it is public knowledge, that report.
It is, Councillor, through you, Mayor, and I was referring to the actual valuation briefing that we will take councillors through next week. But that rate in the dollar number is in the published documents, as you suggested. It's just I don't have at my fingers at the moment the information to be able to respond accurately to your question.
Thank you, Dennis. I believe our CEO would like to make a comment.
Just to answer Councillor Sirakoff's question in general, I'll just get Mr. Keith to explain the difference between a rates cap increase of 1.5% and a rate in the dollar increase. One is on, correct me, Dennis, one's on total revenue collected. The other would be dependent on value to generate that 1.5%. So they're two different figures. And I guess the other point I'd make, Dennis, you may wish to add, is that under our rating system, and this is where valuations are important, and in terms of where the burden falls, depending on the uplift or decrease in values of commercial and industrial and residential, that might shift who pays that 1.5%. So that's the briefing that, through you, Mayor, that we have to bring to councillors, so that, but I think for the community to understand the difference between a rate in the dollar increase and a 1.5% increase is rates cap is important, but also to understand that when you're just looking at one section of the rate base, that it's also dependent on valuations in the other section of the rate base. So I might just leave it there and we'll take the other bits on notice.
Just to clarify though, Peter, you were hoping that Dennis could just explain that first difference?
Correct, through you, Mayor. Just explain that, Dennis.
Thanks,
through
Dennis.
you, Mayor. Yes, Peter, you are correct. The rate cap increase is a 1.5% increase on our total revenue. So our total rates revenue. The actual increase in the rate in the dollar, there are a number of variables that go into that, which is A, the amount of revenue that we're seeking to raise. That would include that 1.5% increment in total revenue from rates. And then it's a case of the total valuations across the city and the number of rateable properties, etc. And that flows then into the rate and the dollar number. So that's probably the best interpretation I can give it at the moment, but more than happy when we go through this in briefing on Wednesday, Councillor, to be more expansive.
Mayor, if I can add, it's Chris Carroll
Thanks,
here.
Chris.
I think one important distinction is also the rates cap is on existing ratepayers. We also have growth in the ratepayer base, which is outside of the cap, but so we might have a certain number of additional properties that are added to the municipality, and so sometimes the total rates take is actually the mix of the rate increase on existing ratepayers plus new ratepayers.
Thank you. It is a complex and subject. Okay, any other questions from councillors? No, well then we'll move on to 6, which is the sealing schedule, but we do not have anything to be sealed. So let's move on to 7, which is petitions and joint letters. We have one petition on tonight's agenda, which is 7.1, the Neighbourhood Community Laneway Garden, Park Street, South Melbourne. Now, councillors, are there any questions of the officers in relation to this report? Councillor Consolo.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Further to the Speaker's question tonight, the process to have the laneway discontinued, I see mention of a common law test in a road discontinuation in a later item tonight. I was wondering if that's something, or you could tell the process and what aspects of a test like that are applicable to this petition, please.
Chris Carroll or Joe McNeil?
Through you, Mayor, Joanne McNeil here. I'll provide a response to that. So in relation to this, the laneway in question, it was gazetted as a laneway in 1915, so it's been around a while, and it looks like it is paved and has public access, and that's important when considering the common law test. So that said, I would need to look at more specifics, but in general, the common law test, as outlined by the court, has two parts to it, two concepts that need to be considered when considering whether a road is a public highway for the purposes of common law. And that is the intention to dedicate the land as a road or a public highway, and that is tested by things like it being gazetted. So it was intentionally made a road, and that's part of consideration of common law, and also the way it's been used. So has it been used by the public for access over time? So they're the two key things that are two key parts of the common law test.
So can I ask a follow-up then?
Yes.
So my understanding of a laneway, the size of this one, and then the planter box would be in the middle. So there's still physical walking space around it because you need that just to garden, etc. So is there a minimum requirement of that, we could say this is still accessible by pedestrian access because no one has a roller door there or something that means it's not useful for cars anymore? Could that be considered?
Through you, Mayor. The Road Management Act is really clear. We aren't able to allow things like that in a parcel of land that's defined as a road. So in order to contemplate a change in use, you would need to make a decision as council to discontinue it as a road, and that's definitely open to council. But council would need to consider things like sale of the road, who's going to own it, who's going to manage it, the cleaning, the maintenance, all of those types of things need to be considered as part of a package in considering this parcel of land.
Councillor Councillor, did you have a further question?
Yeah, one more if I may. So, sorry, can you say, if I missed this, sorry, but the process, if they do want to do this, is what application do they start to ask us to consider this?
So there are two ways that council can go with this. It can consider just simply discontinuing the road, and that would mean that it was no longer a road, but then council would own a parcel of land, and council would need to decide how to manage that parcel of land. So there would be things that would need to be considered around that. Who would manage it? How would it be managed? Who would be contributing to the cost? And as part of a road discontinuance, we need to look at, is it still required for public access as well? So they're things that would need to be considered, as well as would council sell it and who to?
And through you, Mayor.
Yes, Tony.
Council considered the community gardens policy last year, and one of the requirements, if it did become council land, for it to be a community garden, it would have to have open access to the local community. That would be one of the tests. There would need to be a process as to how community members were able to use that community garden. And it would also need to either be through an incorporated body, or it would either need to incorporate and have public liability insurance or be through an incorporated body. So council has some clear tests around what constitutes a community garden. Council set up other procedures to allow, I guess, more spontaneous planting to happen, and we strongly encourage that on footpaths, and the footpath guidelines allow planting in the front of people's houses, providing it's done within those guidelines.
Thank you. I do have a question from Councillor Pearl.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Anyone that's walked around the laneways in this area would have seen that pretty much every single one of them is consumed with some form of garden in it, in terms of pots or plants and those type of arrangements. And this is barely a functional laneway in many respects. So it's interesting that they've come and asked for permission to do this, whereas most people in the area have just gone and done it themselves. My question is what is the current approach that council is taking in relation to the, I would say, close to 100 laneways in the area that already have large pot plants or large community gardens in them already? What is our approach? Do we turn a blind eye to these and ignore them, or do we act when they're reported to us?
Is that Joanne? Joe, just before you speak of it, you're just a little bit quiet before, and I'm not sure if you can get closer to your microphone. Or is it Tony Keenan?
I'm happy to take that, Mayor. It's Chris Carroll.
Chris Carroll?
I'm not aware, Councillor, I haven't walked those streets for a while. I'm not aware of the situation that you've alluded to. I guess in accordance with our responsibilities under the Road Management Act, if we became aware of those things and they were reported to us, we'd need to investigate them.
Uh-oh. Okay. Are there any further questions for officers? I have one, if I may. It's following on from Councillor Consolo's questions. If councillors were of a mind to look at changing the designation of this road, would we need to amend it as part of this motion, or could we do that at a later date? Maybe.
Through you, Mayor, Chris Carroll, I'd need a little bit of governance advice on what to do in terms of this. You could amend it to request us to report back on options in relation to the discontinuance of the road and its potential use of the community garden.
And may I ask a question, Chris, while you're that respond? Is there a rough costing involved in doing this process, given all the considerations that would have to be undertaken?
There is direct financial implications in terms of the legal fees, etc., in terms of preparing the process that we need to go through. I haven't got a figure on the top of my head for that right now for you. Joanne McNeil might.
Through you, Mayor, and this is just an estimate, but it usually costs around $7,000, I think, end to end, and that may include the sale as well. So I would have to check my figures.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any more questions of the officers? Kirsty's going to respond to the governance. Thank you, Kirsty.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Procedurally speaking, there's no trigger in this recommendation as it stands for the report to come back to council. So if councillors did want to include a trigger, they could amend the recommendation as it stands and request that it's brought back to council, either through a briefing for costings to be included or through a council report.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Consolo.
Thank you. I would maybe be interested in an amendment such as that, but I also want to ask if the number 3 there advises the petitioners that they can commence an application for a community garden under the community garden assessment guidelines. Would that trigger any of this? I just want to see what's actionable, because I still think we need to go back to the petitioners and maybe ask, now that they know this information, do they want us to proceed? Are they interested in buying this land? Are they interested? We have a lot of communication back with them, but I don't want to see this just stop today as well.
Through you, Mayor, they can apply, and the first gateway process under the applications is we would consider whether the land that they've identified would be suitable. Our advice would be that it's not, because it's on a roadway. So they would not get past that first gateway. As you point out, one option would be, we have sold land to residents in the past in laneways, and that would be another option, to sell the land to the residents.
Thank you, Tony. Comment from council or question? Comment?
Probably a comment. I take on board Councillor Pearl's comments earlier that there are a number of laneways in our municipality where people have taken things into their own hand, and it's possible that there's a councillor speaking at the moment who might be involved in such a laneway and may have, in fact, inadvertently broken a council bylaw. We probably have a bigger picture here, as well as looking at this particular issue. I'd love this to go to a briefing to come back further down the track so we can look at the issue of all the various unused laneways.
Councillor Martin, I'm just going to have to ask, this is only question time, and maybe that comment could be remain kept for the debate.
I'm going to make a question then that
yes,
separate to this motion, that council officers look to giving us a briefing so that we can work out, is there a way that we can alter our current policy towards these laneways, so rather than have them lie barren, they could be used at least as a temporary basis for something that's of benefit to the community, even if the council needs to take over that land at a later date.
So who would like to answer that question? Could this come back as a briefing on a bigger picture?
Through you, Mayor, and Joanne McNeil can add if she likes, but we will be bringing some reports to you around laneways and road discontinuances, and we can reflect on some of the feedback tonight and whether the scope of that needs to change a little bit to take on some of the issues that have been raised. We probably need to go around and do some inspections of some of the laneways to understand some of the issues that have been raised tonight around how they're being used.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Sirakoff, question?
Just wondering, I think it was mentioned in the petition that the residents are looking at putting in planter boxes, but I just want to know an answer to the following question. If the residents were considering otherwise, would they be prohibited from using the soil directly because it could be contaminated? Would they be aware of that situation?
Who would like to respond to that?
Through you, Mayor, I could provide a response to that. I don't know what information has been provided to them in particular, but all land in a city contamination needs to be considered in all land and soil in a city situations, and that's certainly something that would need to be considered if directly using soil without doing testing. That's just a general statement.
Okay.
Sorry.
So CEO.
Through you, Mayor, I just wanted to go back to Councillor Consolo's question. If councillors were in mind to do anything different tonight, I'd suggest you'd add a 6. If you wanted to amend this, just to help, that's to answer the question, which would be to request that officers speak further to the petitioners now they've had this information, and bring a briefing back to council on options, including options for enabling these activities in similar laneways, something to that effect. So I just wanted to answer Councillor Consolo's first question there without encouraging that, but that's the answer.
Great.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions before we perhaps move to an amendment or a mover for the motion? Any further questions? No. Then, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover of this or something different? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to move an alternate motion, if I may, and just add 6, request council officers to provide further options for community gardens in laneways via a report to council.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Martin. Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Thanks, Councillor Martin, for seconding this item this evening. I think we need to come up with a better balance in this area in South Melbourne. So there's already a well-established, probably a legal array of gardens in laneways, particularly in pot plants, which I know we've had some ad hoc enforcement, because I've had the ad hoc enforcement complain to me over particularly the last 12 months around the Palmerston Crescent area of South Melbourne in particular, where there's a number of what you describe as discontinued laneways in terms of they're no longer serving the purpose of what they were built for, which predominantly was sewage distribution more than 100 years ago. Those days are well over. So the use of those lanes has changed substantially over time. And it's probably time that we had a bit of a strategic review, particularly in areas like South Melbourne, but also other areas including Balaclava and St Kilda East, where potentially this land can be used for tremendous community benefit and community wellbeing through the provision of gardening, community gardens, or just small planter boxes to be placed along laneways, etc. I know from speaking to residents, particularly in South Melbourne, that there's a large number of people that lives have been changed, and our local environment has been substantially improved by small-scale gardening along our footpaths and in our laneways, and we should be doing everything we possibly can at council to foster this as opposed to standing in front of it. So a small amendment to the motion here this evening, which requests council officers to come back and give us some options. Please, council officers, don't go out and do an audit of the laneways and see what's out there and start enforcing the laws. The way I see it, let's do this in a very structured approach, but let's not have this as an invitation to go out and do an audit of the laneways that are currently there. Some of them look absolutely spectacular, albeit they're probably not legally compliant. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Firstly, can I thank the petitioners for raising this whole issue, and they've actually opened up this to make it a larger issue than perhaps they realise. Can I also thank the speaker who spoke on behalf of their laneway project, and she again alluded to the issues of trying to green our local council laneways. Thank you, Councillor Pearl, for alerting us to the many, many, many laneways that are around there. This is an amazing opportunity that we can have to look after the petitioner's request, but at the same time, look after the interests of many more people in our city of Port Phillip who want to make our city as green as possible, but are sometimes constrained by some of the infrastructure, or have perhaps acted in the best interest, perhaps potentially outside council's existing guidelines. And Councillor Pearl's additional point 6 allows us to look after the interests of the petitioners, and secondly gives us the opportunity to look after all those people who've done their best to make our city the green and wonderful place that it is.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Consolo.
My understanding is this is now the motion, and rather than an amendment, I can move an amendment to any part of this motion. So I'm going to ask for number 7, similar to Peter Smith said, along the lines of requests officers speak further to the petitioners and bring a report back to councillors to consider.
Councillor Consolo, can you please repeat that amendment?
Yeah. Request officers speak further to petitioners and bring a report back to councillors. Because I think what else Peter Smith said there was in number 6, similar to what Councillor Pearl's done now. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, can I just suggest bring a report back to councillors on this particular laneway?
Thank you.
That's part 7, whereas 6 is general, 7 then becomes just about this laneway.
Thank you.
Councillor Consolo is happy with that.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and we've got a seconder, which is Councillor Baxter. So, Councillor Consolo, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Thank you. Yeah, I really support this idea, concept. I think we could, just as Councillor Pearl said, these are more opportunities, and on this one in particular, they've already started this petition and are showing their interest. So I think it's our duty to go back to them and make sure that we keep progressing this if they want to. Thank you.
Councillor Baxter? No? Councillor Baxter, I'm assuming you don't want to speak?
Oh, sorry, I was muted on the thing. Yeah, I hadn't actually wanted to second this. I hit the wrong button because I wanted to speak to it, but it's fine. I think this one's fine. I'll second it. So yeah, but what I will say, and this will go for just what I want to say on the substantive motion as well, is that I'm happy for these extra things to be put in, but I'm hoping that in the conversations that we have with the petitioners and also with when talking about further options, that consideration is given to the role that laneways play in drainage, particularly in East St Kilda, Balaclava, Ripponlea, and of course Elwood, because you can't just do whatever you like with the laneway, even if it does look like it is barren, as one councillor said. Sometimes it is doing a very good job at what it's doing, which is to actually retain and then drain water. So that's all I wanted to put forward.
Would anyone else like to speak to this amendment? If not, let's put it to the vote. I'm going to go back round on what we had before. So I'm going to put the motion, the amendment under division. So Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Clark. Councillor Clark, it's very hard to hear you. I don't know if there's any way of improving your sound. Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford, for. Councillor Consolo.
For.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Sirakoff.
In favour of.
And Councillor Baxter.
For.
And Councillor Baxter, your sound's a little bit off at times too. And Councillor Pearl, if you can sit still when you speak, it is everyone's sound's going in and out. So that amendment is carried and now becomes part of the substantive motion. So the two people that have spoken to the substantive motion are Councillor Pearl and Martin. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion as it stands, including 6 and 7? I'm not seeing any movement in the chat, so I'm going to put that to the vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Pearl, would you like to close?
No, that's fine, Madam Mayor. Thought you'd got me then.
Okay, almost did. All right, here we go. Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford, for. Councillor Consolo.
For.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Sirakoff.
For.
And Councillor Baxter.
For.
That motion is carried. So now, councillors, we're going to move on to items 8 to 14, which is a presentation of reports. So let me just get the list of reports. So the first one is the CEO's report, which is item 8.1. Councillors, do we have any questions for the officers on this report? Councillor Martin.
Madam Mayor, in the CEO's report, he alludes to some very important news about the Ecocentre. Can he share that with the council and those people who are watching us?
CEO Peter Smith.
Yes, very good news, Council's advocacy in relation to state funding for the Ecocentre has been successful. In the recent state budget, the state announced funding for the Ecocentre. So we will progress that project now, and it matches the funding that's in Council's budget to be able to progress that within budget over the coming months.
Great. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is relating to the car share locations. It states that work is underway to assess possible new locations for car share and engage with providers. Can council officers advise which areas are under consideration for more car share locations and expansion, and what car parks will be lost as a result? And what is the consultation process undertaken to inform the community before these car parks are changed?
Lily Rosick or Brian T?
Through you, Mayor, I can answer that. The car share policy is actually now due for review, and we've commenced work on that internal review and are looking at the risks and opportunities and in regards to car share locations. All the current licence agreements also expire at the end of June, and we're proposing to enter new agreements. In regards to any new locations, we will, when they're identified, we will obviously undertake extensive consultation and inform councillors prior to implementation. The take-up of car share has been impacted by COVID, so we're not sure what the demand will be going forward at this stage, but we will ensure that councillors are kept informed.
Thank you. Do I have any more questions from councillors on this item? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, so my next question relates to the customer experience program, and it says that complexities of this large-scale transformation have been delayed the program with primary areas under investigation being the migration of data. So could council officers advise what complexities have delayed the program and what is the issue with the migration of data?
I'm not sure if Chris Carroll got that. Councillor Clark, your sound is really terrible again. Councillor Chris Carroll, did you get the question?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Look, we're doing a major organisational change or transformation project here, which has a significant amount of risk associated with it. These are complex projects in any organisation, and I think research kind of suggests that around 40% of these kind of projects actually fail. So it's really important that we get it right. One of the key success factors in any of these kind of programs of work involving technology investment and large-scale organisational process change, and in this particular case, this particular release also has an impact on the community and the customers directly in terms of how they engage and have access to new digital services for the first time. We need to get it right, and in doing that, there's a lot of legacy data that needs to come across from our existing systems, our existing customer system in particular. Pathway has many years of data in it, and to make sure that things work on day one and have some continuity with the past, we've got to make sure that that data is migrated from that system into the new system. Now, not all of it will be on day one, but the base amount will be. We also need to make sure that the new system is integrated with all the other systems that work in council. So while the new system actually reduces the landscape of the number of systems and technology that we support, which is a key benefit, it still does need to integrate with some other systems, so that there's a fair bit of complexity in making sure those integrations work, and therefore the benefits to the community are also delivered. Finally, we're going through a rigorous testing process to make sure that the system works the way that we've intended it to be built. And while about, I think, 4 out of the 5 modules, we're very high in our testing percentage, 95 to 100%, and really exceeded our targets around the success of that testing. In one of our key areas in compliance, which is the one that's going to impact the community the most, we're still getting through some of the test cases and not quite hitting the target levels that we have for a successful go live. So look, that's what we've done instead is we've proposed to extend by a month. I mean, this has been a 3-year program, so a month is not a material amount of time. We've exposed to make sure that we get the data right, we get the testing right, and we get the integrations right, so that this is a success on day one. Because if we're to rush it, the implications in terms of continuity of service and reputation of council and the customer experience will be significantly damaged.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have any other questions? If not, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover and seconder for this report, for this motion? Councillor Martin to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Copsey. Councillor Martin.
I say this every time I move the CEO's report. It's a wonderfully informative document. And again, I urge not just councillors, but anyone who's interested in what's happening in the city of Port Phillip to read it carefully, because there are some wonderful gems there to see.
Councillor Copsey.
To add, well said, Councillor Martin.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? I'll just briefly speak. Again, I echo Councillor Martin's words that there's so much in there, but the one I wanted to highlight to our community that Marlborough Street housing is starting very soon, and that is some social housing for some members of our community that need a home, particularly focusing on older women and families and people with disabilities. So I'm very excited that that finally is heading and starting soon. Councillors, any other speakers? Councillor Martin, would you like to close?
I think it's all been said.
Great. I will put this motion under division, councillors, and call upon you for your vote. Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Copsey. Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford, for. Councillor Consolo.
For.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Sirakoff.
For.
Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
The motion is carried. The next item is 14.1, which is the proposed tenancy agreements for various children's services, childcare centres and kindergartens. Councillors, we have an officer's report. Do we have any questions? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question was, I note that the future proposed tenancy agreements would expire on December the 31st, 2022, and I wondered whether that timing could cause some impact, being given the unusual time of the year, holidays, Christmas periods, things like that, or there may well be another reason why that time was chosen.
Joanne McNeil.
Through you, Mayor. The tenancy arrangements will be completed well before then, and there will be certainty about the ongoing arrangements, as I said, well before then, so I don't consider that that date will be a problem.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? I'm happy to move it. Or do I have a second? Or Councillor Copsey to second? I'll reserve my right to speak to it. Councillor Copsey.
You.
No, thank you. I can't hear you, Councillor Copsey, or is it just me?
No, thank you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I keep
sorry.
talking before my microphone cuts in.
Yeah, great. Would anyone else like to speak to this? Anyone else? If not, I will close. I just want to say that we know how amazing our local childcare, kinder, early childhood education centres are, and the amazing work they do in our community, and it really sets our community up, as we know this is the most important kind of point in a child's life. So I just want to say I'm very happy that this is going out and starting that process. Let's put that to the vote. Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford, for. Councillor Consolo.
For.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Sirakoff.
For.
Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
That motion is carried. Now we're moving to item 14.2, which is the proposed tenancy agreement with Lady Forster Kindergarten, incorporated at 63B Ormond, Esplanade, Elwood. Councillors, we have a report. Are there any questions for officers in relation to this report? Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I had two questions. One was, well, the first one is in relation to, just to clarify, can other residents still use this garden on weekends or after hours under this new agreement? Because I see a lot of people utilising this outside of normal kindergarten hours.
Joanne McNeil.
Through you, Mayor, I would need to just check that. I'm not sure what the arrangements have been previously and what they're intended around how the everybody's been working together on that space.
I think it would be a shame if, you know, lots of people do use it on the weekends, and it would be a shame if that wasn't, well, it appears that non-kindergarten people are using it on my walks on the weekend, so it would be a shame if that was to discontinue for the local community.
Do you have another question?
Yes, and my second question is just clarifying. I know it's mentioned in the motion to us, but I'm not 100% clear. The proposed Elwood foreshore redevelopment is totally separate from the kindergarten and this area. There's no impact to this going forward, given the length of the lease.
Through you, Mayor, the kindergarten, the building is within the Elwood foreshore master plan area and will be referenced in that plan, but we don't consider that this tenure would impact the plan.
Great, thank you.
I have a question, if I may, Joanne, around the, although we passed a motion, and it was probably 2 years ago now, I've lost track of time, for a 10-year lease. Could you explain that the lease is not quite that we're going out to start the proposal? It's 8 years, and sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Could you explain that slight difference, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, Council did resolve to enter into a 10-year lease with Lady Forster Kindergarten, and prior to that they had resolved to advocate the state government. So the existing lease had a few years left, but after that there needed to be a transition plan in order to unlock a further term. And so to provide more certainty, Council advocated for a longer term lease, and the state government approved a 10-year lease. And so that lease is designed to replace the existing lease rather than occur after that lease is finished. So the 10-year term was from 2020, so it's the rest of the term that's left that we're talking about tonight.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? Councillor Martin to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter. Councillor Martin.
Firstly, can I acknowledge, I think it was the director of Lady Forster who spoke to us earlier in public question time and talked about the excellent programs that have existed there. I've been involved with Lady Forster, particularly when they were working in Port Melbourne for over 20 years, and know what a great education institution it is and the great work it does. And I'm delighted that we're able to upgrade their lease, so I commend the motion to you.
Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, they're really great. Ditto.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? I will very briefly. This is a kinder very close to my heart. They do amazing work. It's amazing that they are also little caretakers on our beautiful Elwood foreshore, and I am very happy to see this process go forward. Anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Martin, would you like to close?
No need.
All right, let's take that to the vote. Councillors, under division, Councillor Crawford, 4. Councillor Consolo.
4.
Councillor Martin.
4.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Sirakoff.
4.
Councillor Baxter.
4.
Councillor Bond.
4.
Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor Copsey.
4.
The motion is carried. Item 14.3 is 119 Neville Street, Middle Park, the removal of a land parcel from the road register. Councillors, do we have any questions on this report for officers? If there are no questions, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover and seconder? Anyone? I'm happy to move it. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond to second. So I don't need to, I'll reserve my right to speak to this. I'll reserve my right, to speak to this. Councillor Bond.
No, thank you.
Councillor Sirakoff.
No, thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak to this? I don't need to respond, close it, so let's put that to the vote. Councillor Consolo.
For.
Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Sirakoff.
Yes.
Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford. For. That motion is carried. 14.4 is the records of informal meetings of councils, or council, the singular. Do we have any questions for the officers? If not, do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Pearl to move. Councillor Martin to second. Councillor Pearl.
No, thank you.
Councillor Martin.
No need.
Anyone else like to speak to the motion? Councillor Pearl to close.
No, thanks, Madam Mayor.
Let's put that to the vote under division, everyone. Councillor Martin.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Sirakoff.
For.
Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford. For. Councillor Consolo.
For.
That motion is carried. I'm just checking, that is the last item, reports for us. So we're going to move on to, unless someone stops me now that I've missed something. Councillors, we have notices of motion 15, which is item 15, and we do not have any notices of motion. 16, reports by councillor delegates. Do we have any reports from councillor delegates? No one. Councillor Baxter.
So I'll just briefly say that as the MAV representative from Council, that's the Municipal Association of Victoria. The MAV recently held their State Council meeting that they have twice a year. Luckily got in before lockdown, and it was my first go at a state council. The Councillor Consolo was also there, and we learned a lot, I would say. But it was, I think it was a great day where we dealt with a lot of administrative stuff, sure, but we also took on some really strong advocacy positions on behalf of local government across Victoria, and Port Phillip's position was represented well, based on existing positions that we have, and I hope to do that again soon. I'd rather not do an online one. In person was much better, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Martin.
Madam Mayor, you stole my thunder earlier. I was going to report on Marlborough Street from the Housing First Board. It's been an eye-opener to me, the amount of work that's got into contract negotiations, but by early next week, not only will the notices have all gone out to local residents, but we should know the identity of the successful tenderer, and work will be underway, and it's very, very exciting.
Sorry about that, Councillor Martin. Councillor Consolo.
Perhaps not a delegate, but I did attend the environmental leaders meeting last night. Now they have postponed their pitch night and their graduation ceremony until they can do it in person. But I was really impressed by speaking to everybody and hearing their enthusiasm for the program, which spoke about sustainability, but also about leadership. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in this program. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors or delegates? All right. 17 is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any items of urgent business that I am unaware of? No. So moving to confidential matters, item 18. Councillors, we have no confidential items tonight. And there being no further business, I declare tonight's meeting closed. Thanks, everyone, and thanks for your patience.
Thank you.